Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Messing Around in the Park by Chvin Liu. This happened to me and my best friend not too long ago, and to this day I'm still not totally sure what we escaped from, but I know we did escape from something. One evening we were bored and decided to go out to the park near my friend's house. It was late, but we were only going there for a smoke, just walking around, laughing, joking, doing that thing where you freak each other out on purpose. The park looked eerie in the dark, sure, but it was familiar, so we didn't think much of it. We ended up goofing off by one of the playgrounds, and while we were chilling, I started getting this weird feeling, like we were being watched. I chalked it up to the vibe and tried to shake it, but then I noticed shapes in the distance. Not people exactly, more like shadows that moved when you weren't looking straight at them. It gave me goosebumps. My friend was obviously creeped out too because she said, "Let's take the other path out." So we headed down the opposite way, trying to keep things light. We looped around and started heading toward the street, the only way out without doubling back, and that's when things got really weird. A car pulled up to the exit of the park. It was just sitting there with its headlights on, pointed directly at us. We didn't think much of it at first until the car started slowly creeping forward. No one got out. No windows rolled down. This car just rolled towards us. My friend grabbed my arm suddenly and said, "We need to go, now." We bolted. But in the panic, we split up. She ran back toward the park, and I ran toward this random row of driveways with cars parked along them. The car followed me. I don't know how I thought of it, but I dove underneath the car and laid flat, completely hidden in the shadows. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever was in that car would hear it. And then the car stopped. I heard the door open. I heard footsteps. It was two men, and one of them said, "I don't think they came this way. Check the other side." I stayed absolutely frozen, holding my breath until I was sure they were gone. I must have waited a full 10 minutes under that car before I crawled out and sprinted in the opposite direction. I eventually found my friend, and she was crying and shaking. She thought I'd got taken. She pulled me into a hug and just kept saying, "Oh my God, you're alive." And when I told her what had happened, her face went pale. She said after we split, she ran back into the park and saw a man standing by the gate. He'd cracked his neck and crouched down and stared at her, like full-on eye contact, unblinking. And then he smiled. She ran and hid until it was safe to come out. We both walked all the way back to her house, and it took us nearly 2 hours. And we didn't sleep that night, and we haven't gone back to that park since. We still don't know what those people wanted. But I can tell you this, they weren't just messing around. Stay safe out there. And if you ever get that gut feeling something's wrong, run. A House on a Graveyard, A Village of Shadows, My Real Nightmare, by Big Adwolf 97. Everything mentioned here is real. I just want to know if anyone has been through something like this. My family owns a house in a remote village, deep inside a valley. The road to get there is unpaved and is surrounded by dry, lifeless trees, the kind that look like they're watching you. And the air itself feels heavier the closer you get. Ever since I was little, I used to hear the adults talk about strange things. Stories that sounded creepy, but I wasn't old enough to understand what they were really hiding. What made it worse was that the house was built on top of an old graveyard, not fully covered, and only the rooms, the kitchen, and the bathrooms had a roof. The rest of the structure was open, like unfinished parts of the house, anyone passing by could walk in. The village itself sits deep in a valley, and if someone ever got sick, the very first thing people there assumed was demonic possession. Not a virus, not stress, not anything physical, just possession. And that's how their minds worked, because they knew. It's only been until recently that I began to realize how serious it was. I'm starting to connect pieces, memories, whispers, rituals, and the way some of my family members talked about things no normal person would understand. And honestly, it scares me. Has anyone experienced anything like this? A place where the land itself feels wrong? Or a family that's hiding something too big to speak out loud? Every time we visited my grandparents' house, strange things happened, things that couldn't be explained. I guess paranormal things. For example, people who weren't really people. There was a room across from our kitchen. The floor connecting the room was just old, cracked concrete, and that room was used for sleeping, sitting, and even eating. But something was off about it. At night, when everyone was asleep, an old woman would appear, sitting in the chair facing the TV. She never moved, and she never spoke. I saw her myself when I was a child. Then there were these other entities. We never knew their intentions. One woman had rope-like hair and usually appeared behind the bedrooms, and another old woman stayed near the bathroom, always sitting in a decaying chair. We never understood why they were there or what they wanted. The TV used to act strange too. We thought it was broken at first, and one time we were outside in that open cement area, kind of like a living room, and we heard the TV's volume rise and fall. My mom said she saw a child walking in from behind the room next to it and started playing with the TV knobs, and then just vanished. My aunts once finished cleaning the kitchen and stepped outside for a minute, and suddenly a strange human-like figure, but not quite human, descended from the tree leaning over the kitchen wall. Whatever this thing was, its skin was dark and it walked with a limp. It crawled through a closed window and stayed for a few seconds and then just disappears. My aunts freaked out, and needless to say, the kitchen was a mess right after that. Snakes used to appear often too, and so did geckos. And the cats, some of them were just wrong. One of the strangest cats we saw was a black one with white patches. They said it was an old spirit, and it didn't flinch when approached, and it never meowed, and it would only eat things like puffed corn and juice, like human food. It even used the toilet like a person. Honestly, many of the cats there did. There was one cat that never left my grandparents' bedroom, and the voices, they would literally call your name. One time when my mom was younger, and it was around 4 a.m. in the morning, she went to wake up a relative who used to drive students to school. She knocked on the door and suddenly heard a woman's voice saying, "What do you want? People are sleeping." She ran back to the house in terror, and to this day when she tells that story, she still shudders. All these entities, when angered, they would throw small stones, kind of like a warning, a sign that you should leave wherever you were. And on top of all of it, we kept hearing warnings from others in the village that they practiced witchcraft, that they could hurt people, and eventually we learned the truth. My grandmother, she was one of them. So was her eldest son. Whatever it was had been passed down through generations, but not for protection, and not for healing, only for harm. They didn't do this magic with wands or words. It wasn't fantasy. It was blood, real blood, and sacrifices. They were like a darker version of Harry Potter, but real, cruel, and terrifying. We found out the people there hurt each other with no remorse and using the worst kind of evil, witchcraft and black magic. They even harmed their own, my grandfather and my uncle. And even now, they're still living there. The animals are vanishing. There's fewer dogs and fewer livestock, and the air, it feels heavier, like something dark is just lingering there. We haven't visited in about 8 years. My family's religious, and we have our ways to protect ourselves from evil, so we stay far away now. We only found out the truth about my grandmother 2 years ago. But what about those strange entities? I mean, where did they come from? What do they want? Everybody listening to this, if you made it this far, say a prayer for their dead to rest in peace. And for the living, ask to be shielded from every unseen evil. Wrong Courtroom by Sassy Pants 5. Decades ago, I was in college studying a few different courses, including journalism. I was nervous about taking that program, and I didn't know anyone in the class. Once it started, though, it was nice to be in a room with others like me, the more creative, writerly types. I made friends, including one that would go on to be my child's godparent. But that happened later. The journalism teacher was a really difficult marker, and if he found one spelling or grammar error, he would fail your entire article. Immediately. And even worse, he would write a jaunty little, "Cheers, you fail." It became a goal for all of us to one day get to the lofty perch of no errors. Hey, dare to dream. Anyway, the way the course worked was that at any point during the day, the journalism teacher would show up and assign a story. We grew to dread seeing his curly hair through the classroom door window, knowing that our evenings were about to be consumed by an assignment. That day, we knew we were going to have an assignment because we were taking a field trip to the law courts. When we arrived, our teacher gave us carte blanche to pick a courtroom and write a story on whatever was happening there. All of us were worried that we would pick some crappy and boring procedural or something. The docket didn't give us much info on the cases, so it was very much a crapshoot. Or so we thought. My bestie and I were looking over the lists when a slightly older guy sidled up. He had an official look about him and he whispered, "Be in courtroom 415 at 1:30. Good story, trust me." Trust some guy hanging out at the law courts building? I mean, what could possibly go wrong? So we headed right there and grabbed a seat. By way of orientation, I need to explain, this was a small courtroom. Nothing like the giant ones you see in the movies. Maybe 2 rows of chairs, then the defense and the crown, like the DA for any Americans hearing this. Then the raised bench and the judge. The court reporter was not there, and that was explained as it all got rolling. Us and the guy that had tipped us off, turns out he was an actual journalist, were the only other people watching. The lawyers took their seats, and the defendant, dressed nicely but in shackles, was brought in next. This dude was creepy with a capital C, dark hair and beard, and he stared at the two of us, barely blinking. We had no idea what he was accused of, but his staring and intensity was definitely giving us the willies. I began wishing we had just gone to a traffic court or something. What we were seeing was voir dire, that is, a proceeding to determine if a certain evidence will be deemed admissible. This was a bit unusual because the Crown wanted the trial reopened. The main charge was murder. The creepy guy had bludgeoned his wife to death. That was bad enough. But then he kept her and ate parts of her. Yeah, a murdering cannibal. Awesome. He had pled mental illness, and it seemed everyone had accepted that he was crazy, and were planning to send him to a hospital. Except just after everything was closed, the defendant had turned to the Crown attorney and said, "Can I spill the beans now? I'm not really crazy." Everything was deemed inadmissible since the Crown had rested its case. But the defendant just kept staring at us, even when the judge announced that the guy would be sent to the hospital instead of prison. Then they finally let him out, and court was dismissed. We could not get out of that courtroom any faster than we did. I should add, my article passed 6 out of 10. The journalism instructor was clear that he never gave a 10 out of 10 for anything less than a Pulitzer. So, that was pretty good. Roommate Gone Wrong by Winter Wedding. It was midsummer in 2024. I lived in a small town in Oregon. In January 2024, I got evicted from my house where I lived with my mom and 3 siblings. We struggled to sell the house in the last upcoming days to our eviction and never found a place to stay, so we resorted to living in an RV with 1 bedroom. The RV was broken down and unregistered, so we were forced to live inside a storage unit without any power or running water. My mother and 20-year-old younger sister were addicted to fentanyl, amongst other drugs. We were always accompanied by their druggy friends, which consisted of weird, perverted older men. My mother was in and out of jail constantly for multiple convictions, including theft, hit and run, running somebody over, yeah, quite literally. And I was always tasked with looking after the 2 younger children, 15 and 9. It was weeks, months of this. The continuous drugs, the withdrawals, the jail bails, the abuse. It got so bad that we didn't have any money for food or water, so the littler kids spent days starving or surviving off of school food, and I relied on asking men online for money where I could go to the nearest gas station and buy food for us. It was in walking distance since the truck never had any gas and was always breaking down. I met this one girl online who was 29. And she sent me money here and there for food or gas. She was flirtatious and had obvious intentions to get with me. I should also note here that I was just freshly broken up with my ex-girlfriend of 3 years. She dumped me in January before I went homeless, and at that point in time I wasn't looking for a relationship. We spent a few weeks talking online, and she ended up falling for me. She also made it known that she was transgender, male to female. No surgery yet. I'm a 22-year-old female lesbian, and I wasn't interested. I don't mean to sound rude. I'm not transphobic. I'm just not interested. A few weeks in, she was aware of my abusive, homeless situation and offered me to come down to Florida and live with her. At first, the distance bothered me, but I was desperate to get out of my sad situation. I was an immigrant in the USA. I'm from the UK. I will admit, I've been here illegally for 11 years, so I can't really work. I ended up taking her up on her offer, and she bought me plane tickets that day, set for 2 weeks later. I told my family that I was going on a cruise ship vacation for 2 weeks and that I would be back after. I wasn't planning on coming back, but my mother would not have let me leave if I told her I wasn't returning. 2 weeks passed, and my mom drove me to the airport, begging me not to leave. I ignored her begging, which she did in many, and I mean many forms. At that point, I'd never traveled alone or knew how to navigate an airport, but I was desperate to get out of my situation, and desperation made me willing to do things that were potentially dangerous. I navigated the airport, and I had a 1-hour flight, and then an 8-hour layover, and then a 6-hour flight right after. Now, mind you, I'm terrified of planes and heights. The traveling was awful, and I almost missed my last flight as they did changed planes and I was not notified. So I was extremely stressed on top of everything else. I landed around 1 p.m. in Florida in a black hooded onesie as Oregon was freezing cold. I was met by the intense humid heat of the Florida swamp, and I made my way through the airport. And there was this girl waiting for me at the terminal entrance. She picked me up and swung me around like we were together, and then proceeded to hold my hand all the way to where she had parked her car. I was aggravated as I didn't really enjoy this physical touch and the fact that I was nicotine deprived. We got to the car where I yanked my hand away from her and threw up over the edge of the balcony from motion sickness and jet lag. I lit up a cigarette and took in everything that had happened in the past few weeks, and I had also not slept for over a day. I was too terrified to sleep on the plane. The drive back to her place was around 2 hours, and it was the most awkward drive I've ever experienced. She was quiet, and I was going through a lot of mental problems, completely in denial that I was away from my nightmare situation back home. When we got to her town, she insisted that we get food and then walk around the ocean pier. I was starving, but was completely exhausted at that point, so I asked if we could just go get food and then go home and sleep. She kept making excuses, saying that she wanted to give me a tour of beautiful Florida, and I was too exhausted to argue, so I went along with it. Walking around town in a black onesie in 100-plus degree weather like a zombie. She was obviously getting annoyed with me as I was in a mood, which I was, but I did mention to her multiple times I just wanted to sleep. We got back to her house where I asked where I was sleeping, and she motioned to a single bed where she also slept. She shared a small RV with another man, and we had to share a bed which was put up as she had cats that would pee on her bedding. I asked her to pull it down, but she kept making more excuses and motioned for us to take a walk around her neighborhood to get me used to the area. Again, I was exhausted. We went walking around where I chain-smoked cigarettes and took in the scenery. We got back an hour later, and she still refused to let me go to sleep. The entire walk home as well, she was touchy and trying to hold my hand, etc. We got to her truck where I sat in the passenger side and smoked some more. She joined me and chain-smoked joints. Yeah, pot. Hours went by and I ended up bawling my eyes out in front of her, which ended up in her getting annoyed with me, telling me to just go back home. I was all over the place mentally, and sleep exhaustion was making it worse. And then we went on another walk at night. This was now going on over 2 days without sleep. We got to a little pier again where she was kissing me and holding me, and I was making her aware that I didn't like that either, but she kept insisting. We got home at around 10 p.m. and finally ended up putting the bed down where I fell asleep immediately. Honestly, I can't remember much of the next few days after that, but it consisted of random activities around town and lots of good food. She didn't work and relied on her roommate's income. And they had a weird relationship where she got all his money and he just worked and played video games. But she also took care of him. It was weird, trust me. About a week after this is when things started to get bad. She was snapping at me over little things, getting jealous over people in my DMs and belittling my trauma, calling my family names, and I know they weren't the best. I mean, they really are awful, but that's still something you don't want to hear from random strangers. And then we'd play a few games together where she'd get obviously ragey at them, which also triggered a traumatic feeling for me as I had a previous stepdad with video game rage, and I'd have to listen to him all night go at it, and then eventually at my mom. A few more days passed, and she informed me that she had a son who lived with her family as she couldn't take care of him in her current situation. She asked me to come along with her to her family's house and meet everyone, including her son. I told her that was not a good idea, as I didn't want him getting the wrong impression of me, as she was obviously into me, and thought of me as her girlfriend. Plus, I needed some alone time, as I never got any of that living with my own family. She threw the biggest fit, but eventually left, and she texted me the entire time she was gone. I mean, I kid you not even 2 hours later she returned with all of her family, brought her son inside to meet me and everything. I was furious, but it wasn't the child's fault, so I greeted him gracefully, but made a lot of attempts to hide in the bathroom or a truck to smoke. Finally, they left, and that was it for the day. More days passed, and she would try to get me to go on walks with her to her roommate's work to smoke. I kept asking for some alone time, but each time was met with door slams and messages the entire time she was gone. At that point, the arguing was getting worse and worse, and she was getting more and more violent and was lashing out over small things. One lash out was her trying to fix the air conditioner when she was getting obviously frustrated by the heat. She lashed out on me and then begged me to stand over her with a blow dryer. I mean, that blew out hot heat, and I told her that was a bad idea, and to just step outside for a bit and smoke and calm down. She went completely nuts on me since I refused to do the thing with the hairdryer, so I left and went and sat in the vehicle. Later, she came out to smoke in a mood and was just throwing things around in the truck and smoking in awkward silence with me. The arguing got worse and worse, and I refused sexual activity with her. And she even went to the extreme measure of buying me libido booster gummies to help put me in the mood. It didn't put me in the mood, it made me uncomfortable. She would make these remarks that she was an OnlyFans creator and knew what she was doing. But the truth was I wasn't into men's downstairs, if you know what I mean. That led to a lot of arguments. One night we got into an argument over me not showing her any affection, and I was tired, so I got into bed and attempted to sleep. She threw a fit and told me that if I went to sleep, we were done. I was turned over in bed with the blankets over me completely, trying to ignore her screaming at me. I was also bawling my eyes out, regretting ever coming down there, as I was 2,000 miles away from my family with a crazy stranger. Then she started saying the meanest things possible, and I did my best to block them out. She was going in and out of the RV, slamming the door each time and yelling at me, and this went on for about 15 minutes. The last time, she came in and ripped the blankets off me and forced me to go and talk to her in the truck. I refused and told her I didn't feel like it and just wanted to sleep, but she was relentless. So I got up and did the zombie walk out to the truck where I smoked a cigarette and then blacked out with her screaming at me. At some point, she eventually left and went inside the house, but I finally woke up because she was blasting music so loud it was vibrating the truck from the outside. I spent about 2 hours crying out there, and I finally eventually ordered some food and she came out to eat with me. Then we went inside and slept, finally. After that night, she begged me to go to Gator World with her, a place in Florida where you can view a lot of gators amongst other animals. I didn't really want to, as it was a 2-hour trip and I was exhausted from fighting the night before. She begged, literally begged, and I caved in and went with her. It was awkward the entire time, and I paid for everything as well, with the little money that I had earned from a generous friend online. She spent all her money on pot, even knowing that I had drug trauma. She did the exact same thing my mom did, spend all the money on drugs and leave the rest of us broke. When she was out of weed, she was withdrawing and mean, and it wasn't helping my healing process, as I had just got out of this situation to be placed in an almost similar one. A few more days passed, and it was like I was living in hell. Constant arguing, constant sleep deprivation. I was tired, and not just physically. One of my last nights there, she took me to the beach at night, as I was in love with the beach. We argued the entire drive there and parked the car, and then she began walking, fast. She walked so far ahead of me and got so far ahead in the distance, I was struggling to keep up with her. Now I didn't know where I was going. And we finally got to the beach, and she didn't exchange one word with me, and she sat far away from me and then just walked into the water, fully clothed, and stood in there like she was in a movie or something. Walking back, she was again so far ahead when I was struggling to keep up with her. She eventually stopped and turned back towards me to continue the argument. This is when I snapped back and made a comment about her son. I knew I messed up the second I said it. And she replied with multiple curses and multiple name-calling, where she told me to walk home and told me I needed to live on the street. But I eventually ended up getting in the car with her, and we got back to her RV, and I packed up my stuff and told her I would sleep in the truck until morning, and that I had some money for a hotel and Uber. She got on her knees when I started packing and was just begging me to stay. And I stayed, but started making plans with my best online friend of 6 years to come and pick me up a week later, and then let me stay with her and her parents instead. The night after that, we got into yet another argument. This was the worst. She was yelling at me in the street when I begged her to take it inside, as the neighbors were watching, and I felt embarrassed. She got even more violent. And the fight we had is kind of a blur, as I ended up snapping at her, yelling and screaming at her back, and I think I had some kind of manic episode. I grabbed my stuff, went to the truck, and called my best friend crying. She told me she'd pick me up in the morning, but I couldn't stand staying another night with this girl, so I scrambled up some money and paid for a low-end hotel and an Uber. I grabbed my stuff, got into the Uber with this older man that did look kind of creepy, but he got me to the hotel and he dropped me off. I walked in, checked in, and the manager told me that if I noticed anything creepy, to report it back to her. What? I walked to my room where it looked like something out of GTA. Drug deals going on outside, people yelling at each other. I just went inside my room from the eye-ogling older men hanging outside and immediately locked the door. I also shoved the chair up against it as well and closed the blinds. I got into bed and plugged in my laptop and watched a movie. It was peaceful and the bed was comfy, but the room was riddled in roaches. I mean, they were everywhere. I didn't open my bag as I was afraid of them crawling inside my stuff, and even though there were roaches everywhere, I had the best sleep that I had had in months, since I got kicked out of my home with my own room and my own privacy. The next morning I was picked up by my best friend and her father, and we drove back to her house where they set me up in their garage. I then had the best month after that, as her family treated me amazingly. It was the best month I had had in my life. And regarding the other one, my last interaction with that crazy girl was me going back down there to collect my passport, which she had been keeping from me, along with taking my phone and going through my Facebook, calling me names through my own messenger even. I eventually got all my remaining stuff, left, and I've not seen her again since then. Uncle Josh note here. That story may not sound scary to many people, but I tell you what, when you're in desperate situations and the one place you think you're going to go to is someplace you're going to be safe, and it turns out you're not, I've been there in sort of similar fashion, not as far away, and certainly not as long as the person who wrote that story. But man, I'll tell you what, it brought back some memories of going to some place with someone who you thought was one way and turns out they were not, feeling trapped, and doing everything that you can to get the hell out of there. That's exactly what I did. I certainly didn't wait that long. I waited, I think 2 days, and yeah, that was the last time I saw her. Whew, dodged a bullet with that one. So, appreciate them letting me share that story. Fucked up, and yeah, brought back some crazy memories. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you've heard and seen, give it a thumbs up and hit that notification bell for every time that I upload. But in order to get that, you gotta subscribe. If you haven't already, why not become a subscriber? Maybe even tell a friend what's going on over here on this channel. I sure would appreciate it. Follow me on social media. And if you'd like to take your support of what I'm doing even further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. Lots of other designs on that page as well, with new stuff coming out soon. Check it out. The link to my storefront on TeePublic is down there too. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.